Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 13th of December. And why is the 13th of December important to Alaska weather? Well, if you were watching 40 years ago, you would have seen the very first Alaska weather presentation for the state of Alaska. And we're proud to be continuing the service to our state and your community there. And so thanks for watching, and thanks for trusting us with your weather information from all of us at the National Weather Service here in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, as well as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center and the Tsunami Warning Center, of course, in Palmer, as well as all of the forecast offices across some of these smaller communities in Alaska. As always, you can get that forecast from all of those hardworking folks right for your community at 800-472-0391. Find us at weather.gov/Alaska or any of the other web pages that you'll go to as soon as you click on that site. And of course, got a question, got a really cool weather photo you'd like to share with us, you can do that easily to the entire TV weather team at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Remember this guy? I'm afraid I've never met him. This is Eric Meindl, and in 1979, that's what our maps look like, hand-drawn, right here at KAKM. And you can see the original Alaska Weather TV set right here. It'd be really fun to try and do the weather in front of some of those maps. They really made it look good. And quite a challenge now. Of course, now we're using a green chroma key screen here and considerably better looking cameras here at Alaska Public Media. And all of that has changed substantially in the last 40 years, but a lot of what we're sharing with you, the nuts and bolts, is really the same old good stuff there that helps you plan your day. And again, we're privileged that you trust us with that information. Here's a look out west, and up the west coast, we continue to see a lot of watches and warnings, or watches and advisories, I should say, for winter storms that are coming our way. We've got a winter storm watch in effect for areas around the Baldwin Peninsula and the Selawik Valley there. That is going to go from about Wednesday night through Thursday afternoon, watching to see if things continue to develop for another 2 to 4 inches of snow of accumulation in that area. And from 3 o'clock until 3 o'clock Wednesday for the Yukon Delta region, just right here from Hooper Bay and northward into the Norton Sound region, winter weather advisories in effect. They were worried about the chance of some freezing rain. Most of that will remain about less than 1/10 of an inch or so. A little bit further north, as we were talking about yesterday, a winter weather advisory continues for the St. Lawrence Island and Bering Strait coast, and some of the communities there are still experiencing snow. We expect that to continue at least through tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday or so, another 1 to 3 inches of snow possible for the Bering Strait communities. And freezing rain again, and it's still an issue that we're going to watch as we look at the eastern Norton Sound region, as we're talking about, all the way up north of Stebbins here. Probably some freezing rain continuing through that region as we head through 9 o'clock tonight, all the way through 9 o'clock tomorrow. So the next 24 hours or so, conditions will probably turn better toward freezing rain. And also a little bit further north up the Chukchi Sea coast, we've got a winter storm watch there. That will continue from Wednesday night through Thursday afternoon for the possibility of 2 to 4 inches of snow. And can you figure out why? Here's low pressure out across the western Aleutians. Hefty system here. Now keep in mind as we go ahead in the forecast, the next 2 or 3 maps here, we're going to be talking about one system that's already working its way into the Bering Sea, as you see here. But behind that, there's another weather system, and that's what's going to show up on the map on Thursday. So don't get confused. There's 2 storms. One of them is going to zip up and kind of fizzle out right here across the northwestern Bering Sea. The next one coming in behind it is probably just as strong. So here's the first system, and we're already dealing with that southerly flow working up the west coast. Notice what's not going on. There is clear and cold conditions here across southeast, across the Gulf, and really across most of the interior. This milky white color, of course, is a satellite picture picking up on that really deep cold across the interior. Occasional clouds moving through, of course, but By and large, that is the cold air showing up on the satellite picture. The clouds were streaming over the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, as well as Bristol Bay and the YK Delta, Norton Sound, and all of this was bringing rain and mixed precipitation as it moved northward. Some periods of snow, again, heavy at times around Nome out towards St. Lawrence Island. That winter weather advisory will continue for you until tomorrow afternoon. Quite a bit of wind, look like, out across AKwx. Checking in with some of our friends on Instagram there, and yeah, we do kind of surf around to check and see what pictures you're posting there. And anytime you want to tag AKwx or NWS Fairbanks is actually on Instagram, be sure and check that out. That helps us do our job to see what you see in your community and what's under some of these clouds sometimes. And so some of our friends out there in AKwx like to post pictures, and we sure appreciate that and the comments they say. Anytime we see the rain or the ships out there at sea, it really does help us see what's going on. So this system, as it moves eastward, producing some wind across the chain, and some gusty conditions continue around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and up the southwestern coast this afternoon. High pressure just does not want to give up across the Gulf and across the interior. 1,045 millibars. It is some tough stuff there. And underneath that is some ice fog, and many places have slick travel conditions on the roads and trails there, so do be careful. Out across the YK Delta, periods of snow continue, and that will continue stretching northward as we go through tonight and tomorrow. Out across the east, the ridge of high pressure still in control. There's a weak trough right here, so you might get some breezes and some more clouds along that boundary, and some of that could be very close to the outer coast of southeast. A 954 millibar low tonight. Fills in a little bit more to 963 millibars. The front stretches from eastern Siberia all the way out to about almost Port Haydn and Cape Sarachev down to just west of Sand Point tonight. High pressure sitting across the North Slope and across the Gulf, holding back that storm system with dry and very cold air. The warm and wet air racing northward though, and that's producing that mixed precipitation, the chance for light freezing rain across the YK Delta and into Norton Sound overnight. And periods of snow will continue for the Baldwin Peninsula and the Selkirk region. And north and west, winter storm watch there for the potential of more snow as we get into Wednesday and Thursday as that low pressure system moves through. Now remember, I said there was two storms. Here's the first one. Behind that is the second one. That's going to race in here for Thursday. High pressure starting to get undercut just a little bit more with low pressure working in across the northern side. High pressure is also trying to move eastward just a little bit. It's not going to completely give up. Of course, the overall weather pattern upstairs is still trying to anchor that in place, but we'll see how much longer that lasts. Here's the second storm, and by Thursday, 951 millibar low across the western Aleutians and the Bering Sea, wrapping in cold and damp air, mixing precipitation across the central and western chain. And here's the really important part. Storm force conditions probably tomorrow across the central and western chain. But the second storm should bring up the winds to hurricane force, and that's sustained winds, not the gusts that we're talking about. So many locations there across the central and western Aleutians will be dealing with considerable winds, at least for a while as we get into Thursday. And storm force conditions out ahead of that as well, with that frontal boundary passing through the eastern chain. So watch for some changes there, and again, pay attention to the maximum wind values that are being predicted in your area. There may be some high wind alerts or warnings perhaps, so be ready to receive those and know how you can get that information if that counts for your community. Now, high pressure across the Alcan border will continue to sit right around the Yukon border and just west and into the Copper River Basin. 1,031 millibars, a little bit weaker as you head eastward, or westward I should say. Pockets of snow will start to develop across the interior as high pressure loses ground. You'll notice the pressure gradient picking up a little bit more from the south now across southern parts of southeast, and there will be an opportunity of snow to develop around southern parts of south central moving northward as we go through the afternoon into Thursday. So the weather will be changing for more parts of the interior, southern and south central parts of Alaska. Not so much for southeast, but maybe the breezes coming up for you will be a little bit of a change. Now, one apology here. Our network, or at least our feed into the National Network of Observations, several stations are just not reporting due to a problem with the network this afternoon. So we've got what we've got today, and we're going to tell you what we see. Temps are in the teens, 20s, and 30s across parts of southeast by late this afternoon. And we saw kind of hit and miss temperatures across south central, readings in the 20s and 30s around Prince William Sound. Made it into the teens in some parts of Anchorage today, 14 in Kenai, 36 around Homer. It was 2 in Healy this afternoon, 21 below in Fairbanks. Oh my goodness, that's cold stuff. 27 below up around Fort Yukon and into Old Crow. 24 below for Arctic Village, Tanana, and places out around Ambler and Bettles are anywhere from single digits, about 5-6 degrees there, to about 10 to 20 below. The North Slope saw temps in the single digits on the positive side across the Beaufort Seacoast, and around Barrow, temperatures were also hovering around 0 this afternoon. Single digits and teens for most of the Chukchi Coast. Wainwright was 16 degrees, 26 around Shishmaref, 23 in Nome. Shaktoolik was 15 degrees. Areas around Nome only in the single digits at best, some places well below 0, of course. 2 in McGrath, and 24 above in Bethel. 33 for Nunivak Island, 30 around Savunga and St. Lawrence Island there. Southwest, you're looking at temps in the 20s and 30s. Kodiak Island in the upper 30s today. Lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint 43, about the same there in St. Paul. And the central and western chain in the upper 30s and lower 40s. Adak was 41 this afternoon. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay about 15 to 40 below across the interior. Some of the cold spot honors probably going to Fort Yukon, Northway, and Eagle. Arctic Village at 25, not as cold there. 5 to 15 below for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound temperatures in the single digits. Norton Sound temperatures, including Nome, in the teens and 20s, warming up for the southwest coast, 20s and 30s there. 37 in St. Paul, upper 30s for the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, 34 in Kodiak. Probably sub-zero for most along the Parks Highway from, well, let's say the Hayflat southward into the Kenai Peninsula, above 0, but maybe only by a little bit. And southeast, single digits and teens with a few 20s there across the outer coast. Most places like the capital city will stay in the low to mid-teens tonight. And highs tomorrow back in the upper 20s to low 30s. So conditions are warming up for you. In the Copper River Basin, close to 20 below, 30 below in Fort Yukon for a high tomorrow. Single digits develop for the northwest coast. Kotzebue Sound temps back in the 20s. 20s and 30s for Norton Sound. The YK Delta above freezing for many locations by a little bit. And South Central back in the single digits and teens with Homer and Seward back in the 30s, 38 in Kodiak, 40s for the peninsula, and most of the chain with St. Paul at 40 degrees. On to flying weather, IFR conditions ahead of the front moving across the west coast into Norton Sound and across most of the valleys out across the western Alaska region. And for Kodiak Island, IFR is expected to develop from southwest to north and east. For southeast and most of the Gulf Coast and north, probably looking at relatively clear conditions. Same goes for the afternoon. You'll notice the focus will be for IFR through the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Coast and the southwestern coast, as well as the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula and again, Kodiak Island. Here's your pass conditions. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass look to be okay for sealing and visibility. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass may suffer a little bit, especially on the western side. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass all look to be VFR for at least another day. Changes could happen later in the week. Mentasta Pass we're going to call VFR. Same goes for Tanita Pass. Tomorrow, VFR conditions expected there. Portage Pass, VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass. Cold, but VFR. Here's a look at the freezing levels now, and you can see the impacts of that warm storm sending southerly winds up the west coast anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 feet across the YK Delta. The surface freezing line underneath that. And remember, we were talking about yesterday a great setup for mixed precipitation and freezing rain. That's what we're talking about right there. When you see that, just know that's the pattern you need to have something like that happen. Surface freezing line is just off the coast of southeastern Alaska as well, so we're going to start out cold there in the morning. Icing potential is running from about 2,000 to about 5,000 feet, and if freezing rain develops here, that should automatically imply not just light to isolated moderate, but probably isolated severe with freezing rain in there. Of course, that type of ice just horrible for any flying conditions there. So watch the weather carefully if you're in the YK Delta, especially north of Bethel into the Norton Sound region tomorrow, where those conditions will be more likely throughout the day. Above 8,000 feet for the Gulf of Alaska there. Again, we're going to call that light to isolated moderate. The jet stream shows our big trough across the eastern Gulf now and into the Pacific Northwest. You see high pressure still in charge of most of mainland Alaska and that strong southerly flow here, but the new trough of low pressure is really cutting south hard. And so a lot of that active weather is going to break off and kind of linger in this region right here. So you'll notice there isn't really a whole lot of fast motion from this first storm, and the next one moves in hot on its heels thanks to that strong westerly flow at 135 knots. So interesting weather pattern developing here. Very high amplitude ridges and troughs, which generally means slow to no moving weather. At 9,000 feet, a southerly flow coming up the west coast here, 30 to as high as 40, even 50 knots across the Bering. Light winds generally across the interior, 10 to 25 knots, some of that making its way down into southeastern Alaska, northwesterlies across the Beaufort Seacoast, southerlies across Kotzebue Sound, and much stronger winds for the central and western chain at 9,000 feet. At 3,000 feet, winds are also coming up across the western coast, way at around Nunivak Island and Monarch in the western tip of the YK Delta, as well as the Seward Peninsula, but high pressures trying to slow things down across the interior. 15 to 30 knots there. Light winds across Kodiak Island. Southerlies developing across the western Gulf at 20 knots, and we're still seeing that cold draining across southeastern Alaska at about 25 to 30. Light winds again across the Beaufort Seacoast at 15. You might see a little bit of chop there, though, as the wind conditions are changing around. Below 4,000 feet, we'll say, and up across the Bering Strait, the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound region, with the front moving through, and not to mention poor visibility, but the turbulence alone, you're probably looking at some occasional moderate around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. So just be careful about changing conditions there. And then that, combined with the potential for icing conditions across the YK Delta and Norton Sound, probably a good day to just sit there and watch the weather roll through. You'll notice changing conditions just south and west of the Aleutians. That will be moving into the Bering, and then just along the outer coast of southeast below 4,000 feet and in Shelikof Strait and southern Cook Inlet, watch for some isolated chop. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the Marines here in just a few minutes.
Well, that was obviously too easy for everybody, so let's do another one. But right here, first of all, we have some CB and we have some BKN. You can see the real weather out there. All right, let's take a look at this other weather report. This is a special weather report issued for Cheyenne, Wyoming at 23rd day of the month at 18:15 Zulu. Now notice most weather reports are issued before the hour. This one's after the hour, and that's because it's a special weather report. There's some kind of change in the weather. The wind is from 290 degrees at 8 knots, and then we have 1 statute mile visibility, and the runway 9 visual range, RVR, is 6,000 feet plus 6,000 feet. That P tells you more than 6,000 feet. And we have dash TSRASN. Be careful. That dash describes the precipitation, not the thunderstorm. This is a thunderstorm with light rain and snow. There is no such thing as a light thunderstorm. All right, let's take a look at what else we have here. We have broken clouds at 700 feet. That's the ceiling because that's the lowest layer of broken or overcast clouds. We have an overcast at 2,500 feet, and those overcast clouds are cumulonimbus clouds. And we have a temperature of 2 degrees Celsius. That's plus 2 degrees Celsius, but a dew point of minus 2 degrees Celsius. The altimeter setting in inches of mercury, the A tells us that's in inches of mercury, is 29.95. And the remarks say occasional lightning in the cloud and from cloud to ground. And the thunderstorm began at 14 minutes past the hour. And the thunderstorm is west moving east. Now notice there is no tense, no dew point and temperature given to us in tenths here because it's a special report. Also no sea level pressure given to us back here. Those are not given to us in a special report. And finally we have the equal sign, and that tells us that's the end of this report.
What we look at to get the forecast weather at specific locations is the Terminal Aerodrome Forecast, or the TAFs. The TAFs use the same weather coding as the METAR that we've already become comfortable with, and in general they're pretty easy to read. So let's take a look at it. When you take a look at a TAF, there's only 2 possible report headers that you might see. First of all, TAF for Terminal Aerodrome Forecast when you have a routine forecast. But occasionally you'll get an amended forecast, and in that case you'll see TAF AMD for amended, and you'll also see a non-standard issue time and a non-standard less than 24-hour valid time. We're going to talk about those more in just a minute. Now, just like with the METARs, the TAFs begin with a series of W's: where, when, and the wind. Who is left out of the TAFs, though, because there's not yet any such thing as an automated forecast. The first W is the where. The station identifiers used are the same 4-letter ICAO codes that were used in the METARs. So DCA for Washington National becomes KDCA in the ICAO code. The next thing we've got up here, the second W, or when, is really two parts, because we have a when issued and we also have a when valid for use. The issuance times for the TAFs are always in UTC, and they've got the letter Z appended at the end just to remind us of that. Now, the TAFs are all issued 4 times daily, and they're issued for 24-hour periods that begin at 00 Zulu, 0600 Zulu, 1200 Zulu, and 1800 Zulu. The National Weather Service requires that forecasters file their forecast for transmission no earlier than 30 minutes and no later than 20 minutes before the beginning of the forecast valid period. So we'll know exactly now when forecast will be issued without any mental calculations. Because when Mickey's little hand is on the 6 or 12 of your watch, when set to UTC, that means that a new forecast is coming out. So let's take a look at that issue time in our TAF. The issuance field has a 2-digit date and then a 4-digit time followed by the letter Z. So this TAF was issued on the 19th day of the month at 1730 Z. Now the second part, the second half of the W for when, is the valid period for the forecast. This is also 6 digits, but does not have the letter Z attached. So the time, date and time with the Z on it is the issue time. The valid time does not have the Z. What we've got here is a valid period from on the 19th day of the month, 1800 Zulu, to 1800 Zulu on the next day of the month, the 20th day of the month. Forecasts are normally valid for a 24-hour period like this one is, but can be valid for a shorter time. For instance, they would be valid for a shorter time if you had an amended forecast.
No question about it, with stronger southerly flow working up the west coast, a lot of this ice is already changing. We're seeing changes today across the southwestern coast and into Bristol Bay, so don't consider this to be very stable or permanent right now, as conditions will continue to change in the next couple days. And remember, there's another storm behind it. We're also seeing some slow growth now across the Chukchi coast and around the Bering Strait, especially thanks to that southerly flow warming conditions up. So with the wind plus the warmth, it may not close off completely again for several days. So wait for more changes there. You can check at any time at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for concentration and thickness, which is oh so important. Now, at southeastern Alaska, we're still dealing with some gusty winds. A trough of low pressure is close to home here, so while conditions are cold and generally clear, there's still a little bit of a breeze making you feel even colder. 10 to as high as 35 knots across the inside waters, with some stronger gusts in the Lynn Canal, of course. Some of those tomorrow could come up to 50 knots. 7-foot seas there in the north, 2-foot seas in the Clarence Strait, and north and westerlies will be the predominant flow across the outer coast, with northeasterlies coming out of Cape Fairweather to Icy Cape and up around Yakutat, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. That comes to an onshore flow on Thursday, 15 knots there. Northeasterlies south of Sitka down toward the Dixon entrance, and northerlies will remain gusty as we head into Thursday for the Lynn Canal. 7-foot seas there, and winds come up in the southern inside waters, 20 to 30 knots with 4 to 6-foot seas. For South Central, look for light winds inside of Prince William Sound and across the open waters of the Cook Inlet. Northeasterlies down south, 25 knots with a 9-foot sea, 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, and light winds across the western Gulf, but they come up to 20 knots east of Kodiak Island on that southwesterly flow and should stay about the same as we head into Thursday. Southerlies across the western Gulf develop to 15 to 20 knots. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 6-foot sea. Light winds continue across the northern Cook Inlet region south of Calgon Island, 25 knots with a 4-foot sea, and easterlies west of the Barrens at 15 knots for Thursday. Inside Bristol Bay in the ice-free waters, southeasterlies at 25 with a 5-foot sea, 6-foot seas down the coast, and a broad southerly flow coming up to reach the Pacific coastline at 25 knots with seas as high as 13 to 16 feet. Seas will diminish a little bit more on Thursday. We'll keep the southerly flow for the Pacific coast from Sand Point westward, 25 knots with a 12-foot sea. The winds come up across the Bering Sea coast from Port Heiden to Cape Sarichaf, 40 knots there with a 13-foot sea with 5-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay. Now for the Aleutians. Remember, 2 storms. The first one brings you storm force winds as we head through the period Wednesday night and into Thursday. Winds come up even more. Look for southerlies 20 to 35 knots for the central and eastern chain, 10 to 17 foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, 15 to 19 foot seas across the Pacific, with 40 knot winds out across the west, seas at 24 feet. Now, here's Thursday. The second storm brings those storm force winds eastward and gives us hurricane force winds out across AKwx and all the way out towards Shemya. So be prepared for changing conditions with that second storm. It will be considerably stronger. 45 knots from Nikolsky to Unalaska on a southerly flow, 50 knots across most of the central chain, 21 to 31 foot seas, and 41 to 46 foot seas from AKwx to Kiska out towards Shemya. Again, all with higher gusts. So be prepared for changing weather in the central and western Aleutians, especially as we head into Thursday, but also in the east. So be mindful of your weather. Out across the west, broad southeasterly flow for most areas, 30 knots on the Bering for Wednesday, with 14-foot seas in the north and freezing sprays a possibility. Southerlies there for St. Paul and St. George on a 14-foot sea. For Thursday, broad southeasterlies continue, but much stronger winds for St. Paul and St. George, up to 45 knots, and the same goes for areas around St. Matthew Island, 35 to 40 closer to the coast, with 13 to 14-foot seas. Light winds in the Beaufort Seacoast, and 20 knots to as high as 35 knots for most of the Chukchi coast, mainly coming out of the east on Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, southerly winds make their way northward, 20 to 25. Broad easterlies pick up across the Beaufort Seacoast at 25 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm watches continue for areas northward looking for additional snow, and winter weather advisories for the YK Delta, especially north of Amonic and into Norton Sound, where light amounts of freezing rain will remain possible. Snowfall accumulation will be generally light for most of the north and western communities. Once again, it's my privilege to serve Alaska Weather with you tonight. After 40 years, we're privileged to continue this service, and thank you for trusting us with your weather. To all of the Alaska Weather team and our folks at Alaska Public Media, thank you very much.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.